Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, Even Tinkerbell Has Had Enough. This is an old story, but it just popped into my head while I was hunting through videos on YouTube, so I figured I'd post it. This is an old story, and I can't remember exactly how all the conversations went, so they're pretty much my recollection. Years ago, shortly after I had left the service, my girlfriend, now wife, and I moved in together, halfway across the U.S. from both our respective families. Long stories from another time, and to a place where we both had friends as a result of our military travels. One of my wife's friends, we'll call her Anna, had gotten married in the intervening years since they had last been together and was in the process of a divorce since her husband had knocked up the checkout girl at the local orchard. She had left the home, a single wide trailer, important later, that they owned, left the car they owned, which she had solely paid for and was still in her name, moved back in with her parents, and got a second job. She already worked at a large big box retail establishment. Of course, my wife and I commiserated with her on multiple occasions about how poorly she had been treated. Anna made a remark at one point about missing her bills that month. My wife asked, "What bills?" "You live with your parents, you have 2 jobs, no credit cards, and you never do anything expensive. What could you possibly owe anyone money for?" Turns out that she had a checking account still linked to her ex-husband's account, and when he decided not to pay the mortgage or car payment, they simply took it out of her account, marked the loan current, and went on with their lives. Shortly after the divorce, he would make most payments, but for the last year or so, he hasn't made a single one. So ex-hubby has perfect credit because he never misses a payment, and Anna's credit is in the toilet because she is constantly late on her own bills. Anna may have 2 jobs and not a lot of bills, cell phone, car payment, insurance. When she's making someone else's mortgage and car payments as well, she's pretty much broke. And that's why she never does anything expensive and has to have me change your oil in my gravel driveway because she can't afford $20 for Jiffy Lube. I asked her why she didn't close the account and go somewhere else. Anna's answer, "But if they miss their payments, the bank will take their house and their car, and they have a baby. I can't do that to them." I did the Forrest Whitaker eye. Then I said, "They're taking advantage of you pretty badly. They've established that you'll pay all their bills for them, and they can do whatever the hell they want because you'll never force the sale of the house or the car. If I had an option to pay my bills or pass it off to someone I don't like, I'd let them do it every time." He's paying an electric bill and getting a free house, car, and everything else. And I guarantee you that he's handing these bills to the social worker and claiming he can't afford to live. So they'll give him WIC, food stamps, and everything else. You're funding the lifestyle of an a-hole who cheated on you and a woman who knew he was married because every time she came over, she made him take your wedding pictures down. So she didn't have to look at you while she screwed your husband. You're paying bills for a guy who is so dumb that he thought he could get a woman pregnant he wasn't even married to, and to a woman who thought if she had an orgasm before she came over to sleep with your husband while you were at work, her egg would be gone, and she couldn't get pregnant. The dumb bitch was using a sex toy as birth control. You see, I may not give a rip about most of my family, but you do not duck with my friends. She gives it some thought, and a couple of days later asks for some help out of this. I took her to the bank to get an account the next day. She moves her direct deposit, withdraws her money, and closes her old account. The next month, ex-hubby's bills don't get paid. We're watching a movie when he calls. She spends an hour in a screaming match with him, telling him to pay his own bills. She has been charitable enough, and he and his new wife can pay for their own crap. Then the penny drops. Remember earlier when I said the house was a trailer? Anna has been paying the mortgage on the trailer, but not the rent for the lot it's on. They never had her checking account. This entitled prick has been assuming she's been paying that too. She assumed he had. He hasn't even figured out what's coming yet. He's calling because he's pissed off she hasn't paid the lot rent in forever, and he's being told to pay up, move his trailer, or they'll do it and hold the trailer in arrears until the bill for moving it is paid. He's calling to ask her for another $6,000, or they'll lose the home they both love so much. Now, up until this moment, Anna had been this sweet, wonderful gumdrop of a person, the type of person that it should be legal to slap if they're encountered before 9 a.m. The relentlessly sunny person that you send into the room to cheer up Tinkerbell. In the better part of a year, I haven't heard this woman say a bad thing about anybody. Up until tonight, until this guy called to complain that she hadn't been paying enough of his bills. And she loses her mind. She lights into this guy that he'd better figure it out because he's not getting another penny from her ever again. And while he's figuring out who to beg, borrow, or steal that money from, he may want to get a little extra since he's about to get the overdue notices for the house and the car too. He starts screaming so loudly I can hear what he's calling her from across the room. Before she calmly hits the end button, flips the phone over, pops the battery out, sets them both down on the table, hits play on the VCR, morphs back into a normally sunny self, and offers to make popcorn. Monday morning she went to the lawyer, filed a no-contact order, filed for bankruptcy, her credit was already a mess, and there were bills with her name on. She didn't want that splatter all over her, and called the dealer that owned her car note, told her she couldn't make the payments anymore, and offers them a voluntary repossession, has them bring out their tow truck, and meets the driver with the keys and the paperwork. Signs the forms, asks the driver oh so sweetly to drop her off at her parents' house on the way back to the dealer, and waves at her ex from the passenger seat of the tow truck as he comes running out of the trailer wearing only a towel. Over the course of the next month or two, he lost his job because he couldn't get to work anymore. His wife had to go back to weighing pears at the orchard. Turns out she'd left her job when Anna was paying for everything, and sell his record collection, which was what he had been spending his money on while someone else was paying for everything. On the bright side, I picked up the original vinyl copies of Abbey Road and Yellow Submarine for a total of $5 because his idiot wife running their yard sale didn't understand why the old crappy records were worth anything anyway. And that's how Tinkerbell burned some entitled a-hole's life to the ground. The next story is titled, My HOA Neighbor Illegally Trespasses on My Property to Steal Water for Their Unapproved Pool. A few years ago, my family and I decided to go on a much-needed vacation to visit some relatives. Before we left, I made sure to double-check everything in the house, from the locks on the doors to the windows. I had no idea that one of the last things I checked, the spigot in the backyard, would be the one thing that would be the cause of the biggest headache of my life. Our neighbor was an obnoxious and entitled person, always thinking that the world revolved around him. Whenever he saw us outside, he would come over and start talking about himself, boasting about his achievements and making it clear that he was superior to us in every way. I tried my best to avoid him, but it wasn't easy when he lived right next door. The weekend we were gone, our neighbor saw an opportunity to take advantage of us. He used a hose from our backyard spigot to fill his in-ground pool and an extension cord from our outlet to power his backyard. He didn't care that it was illegal or that it was stealing. He just wanted to save some money on his water and electric bill. He didn't think he would get caught, but he was wrong. When we returned from our vacation, I noticed that the grass in our backyard had a large dent in it, and something told me to check our security cameras. When I did, I was furious. There he was, my neighbor, trespassing onto my property, stealing my water and electricity, and acting like he owned the place. I decided to call the police and report him for trespassing and theft. The police came and gave him a warning for trespassing and said that he would have to pay for the water and electricity that he used that weekend. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to get revenge on him for what he had done. I remembered him boasting to me, before about how he had installed his pool without permits to avoid paying fees and how it was not up to safety standards. That's when I had an idea. I decided to call my HOA and report my neighbor's pool for violating safety guidelines. The HOA promptly investigated and they found several safety violations, including the lack of a permanent ladder, being too close to the back doors, and failing to cover the pool when not in use. As it turns out, my neighbor had not followed the HOA rules for private pools. The HOA informed him that he would have to remove the entire pool, and he had to pay a fine for building it without permits. He was left with a big hole in his backyard filled with dirt and a severely damaged property value. My neighbor was livid, and he soon moved away, but not before he threatened to get revenge on me. For months, I lived in fear that my neighbor would come back and try to get revenge on me. I didn't know what he was capable of, and I didn't want to find out. But as time went on, I realized my fear was unfounded. My neighbor never came back, and I was able to relax and enjoy my life without worrying about him. As an update, a few years after my neighbor moved, a new family moved in. They were friendly and courteous, and we became good friends. The new neighbor always respected my boundaries and privacy, and I appreciated their thoughtful approach to being good neighbors. One day, the new neighbors invited me over to their backyard to show me something. When I got there, I was surprised to see they had installed a beautiful swimming pool. It was clear they had gone through all the proper channels to get the necessary permits, and it was up to safety standards. As we sat around the pool sipping drinks and enjoying the sunshine, I couldn't help but feel grateful for my new neighbors. They had reminded me that not all neighbors are difficult, and it's always better to resolve issues through proper channels. Like the HOA, as we talked, my new neighbor revealed that they had a run-in with our old neighbor before they moved in. They had heard that he had installed a pool without permits, and they had reported him to the HOA, but they didn't know how serious the situation was until they moved in and saw the big hole in the ground in the old neighbor's backyard. They were shocked that someone would go to such lengths to avoid paying fees. As we continued to talk, I noticed that my new neighbor seemed to be getting upset. When I asked what was wrong, he told me that he had received a threatening letter from our old neighbor. The letter stated that he knew about the HOA report and that he would get revenge on them for reporting him. I immediately called the police, and they took the letter as evidence. They told us that they would investigate, but we didn't hear anything for weeks. We started to worry that our old neighbor was up to something. We didn't know what to do. One day, while I was at work, I received a call from my new neighbor. He was frantic, and he told me that he had heard a noise in his backyard. He had gone to investigate, and he found that someone had cut the power to his house. He was terrified that our old neighbor was trying to hurt him, and he didn't know what to do. I rushed over to his house, and we called the police. They arrived quickly, and we found that someone had cut the power line to my neighbor's house. They couldn't be sure who did it, but they suspected that it was our old neighbor. They told us to be careful and to call them if we noticed anything suspicious. For weeks, we lived in fear that our old neighbor was going to come after us. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, and we didn't feel safe in our own homes. But eventually, the police caught our old neighbor, and he was charged with trespassing, theft, and criminal mischief. He was sentenced to prison, and we finally felt safe again. As an update, my new neighbor and I have become even closer since that incident. We all realize that having good neighbors is important, and we look out for each other. We have formed a neighborhood watch, and we make sure that everyone in the neighborhood feels safe and secure. In the end, the incident with our old neighbor taught us that it's always better to resolve issues through proper channels, and that having good neighbors is essential. We also learned that sometimes people are willing to go to great lengths to avoid paying fees, and it's important to be vigilant. But most of all, we learned that when we work together, we can overcome even the most challenging situations. The next story is titled, EM Demands Nurse Make Me Cover My Tattoo That's Scaring Her Sleeping Child. I'm in the ER waiting room, and an EM comes in with her deathly ill child that's fast asleep in her arms. I'm wearing a tank top and have a Spirited Away theme piece on my upper arm. I've been here for 2 hours already. EM keeps looking my way, huffing, dramatic sighs, and dirty looks. I have no interest in engaging, so I continue to ignore her. Finally, she stops a nurse and says, "You need to tell that person to cover that awful offensive tattoo." Nurse gives a blank stare. EM continues, "It's scaring my child. He's traumatized." Nurse looks at me. I meet her gaze out of the corner of my eye. She looks down at EM and tells her to wait outside or in her car if she had a problem. EM keeps saying how traumatized her child is. She's woken him up now from her yelling. She tells security that I need to move or cover up my horrific arm, or she's going to call the cops for indecent exposure. At this point, everyone is fed up. Security tells her to quiet down and take a seat or leave. Final warning. At this point, I'm laughing. Long story short, she tried to call the cops. An officer was already here. He poked his head in to look at me, then walked back out. Said something to her, and she left screaming bloody murder about indecent exposure to my poor child. I'm still currently in the waiting room. The last story is titled, "Why is only some of the wine free to taste?" The premium wines should also be free. In this wine region, if you go to cellar doors, you can get wine tastings that are free. Hit up a bunch of wineries, and it's a good day. Some cellars may have a premium range, which they ask for a small fee to sample, but there will be other wines you can taste for free. Any place that charges you a fee will refund the fee if you buy any wine. Went to a well-known place and tasted about 10 wines for free. They had a premium dessert range, and if I wanted to sample that, it would be $10. I'm not into sweets, so I skipped that even though I was buying other wine. The other random couple were already there before we arrived for our tasting. They had been low-key arguing with a staff member the entire time we were there and walked through 10 wines, and who knows how long before we arrived. I was buying some wine, so approached the register near the couple. Karen and the couple was very insistent on sampling the premium dessert wines, but did not want to pay. Sweet wines are my absolute favorite, so I will definitely buy a lot of bottles, so you should give me a free tasting anyway. The very patient staff member was repeatedly explaining that the $10 would immediately be credited to any wine purchase. I left Karen still arguing with staff. She could have hit another nearby winery and tasted a dozen wines in the time she took to argue over $10. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again.